Welcome back to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, a podcast where we explore the intersection of psychological science and everyday life for men. I'm Dr. Daniel Bates, and this is the second episode in my series examining the research on pornography consumption and men's mental health. Today, I'm focusing on a particularly contentious topic in our field, the concept of pornography addiction and compulsivity, the patterns associated with problematic use, and the approaches to treatment. In my previous episode, I provided an overview of how pornography consumption may affect men's neurological functioning, psychological well-being, and relationships. Today, I want to do a deep dive into the ongoing scientific debate about whether problematic pornography use should be conceptualized as an addiction, a compulsion, or something else entirely. Before I begin, I want to remind the listeners that my approach is meant to be educational and based in empirical research. So I'm not here to moralize or judge, but to understand this phenomenon and then give men pathways to experiencing a more fulfilling life. Okay. So the question of whether pornography can be addictive has generated a significant amount of debate in the scientific community. So to understand this controversy, we need to first clarify what we mean by addiction. So I touched on this in the last episode, but traditionally addiction has been conceptualized primarily in terms of substance dependence. So the typical image that comes to mind is drinking alcohol or needles or substance use or taking pills, something of that nature. And so folks will use those substances and they'll build what's called tolerance. And that tolerance, when they're not using it, that will lead to withdrawal. And then they'll go back to the substance and they'll continue to use it with ever-increasing negative consequences. And so I kind of touched on, gave a brief overview in this last episode, but they'll continue using, but it's not leading to the same high or the same reward payoff, so to speak. And so there's almost kind of an irrational pattern of behavior where there's continued use, but there's an expectation of reward. And we don't really see those patterns of behavior with other things, right? You eat a piece of pizza, and that first piece of pizza is amazing. You eat a second piece, not as good. Third piece is not so good. At some point you reach a point of satiation, and you're like, I'm 4 pieces in. I'm not going to get any more pleasure out of this, so I'll stop. Now, I think we could also add that sometimes folks actually do develop problematic behaviors, patterns of behavior with eating. So that's a topic for another podcast. But I had listed out porn could be kind of considered a behavioral addiction last episode. So could gambling. I think we could also list problematic, eating habits, where folks will eat to the point that it's becoming problematic in their life, a great deal of consequences, but the pleasure is ever and ever diminished. Okay, so in recent years, however, the concept has expanded beyond substance dependence. Now it includes behavioral addictions like gambling, which I just mentioned, which is currently the only behavioral addiction formally recognized in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, also known as the DSM. But I do think this area is getting ever-increasing level of attention by researchers and clinicians, especially with the rise of the internet and internet addiction and social media addiction, right? Now we're kind of slapping the term addiction onto everything. So that's why we have to have careful definitions and be able to operationalize those definitions and make distinctions in terms of constructs. Are we just kind of slapping the name onto something that, doesn't hold its water as a construct and isn't distinct from other constructs? So that's where we have to be kind of careful. And I kind of alluded to this last episode, but that's also kind of one area of debate too, is is a porn, quote unquote, porn addiction being mislabeled as an internet addiction? Are we just kind of addicted to the novelty and having lots of tabs up and something new and unexpected just constantly being delivered in nanoseconds via the powers of the internet? All right. However, pornography use is not currently classified as an addiction in major diagnostic systems. In 2018, though, the World Health Organization included compulsive sexual behavior disorder in the International Classification of Diseases, also known as the ICD. So in my world, there's kind of two bodies, the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, with the DSM, and then there's also the World Health Organization with the ICD. And those two systems are things that we used as a taxonomy for identifying, naming, and diagnosing mental health disorders. So, the ICD may come out with something, whereas the DSM is straggling behind, or the DSM leads and the ICD follows behind. But usually, in most cases, at least in my career, I've seen the ICD kind of lead the way in some things. So I think it's good that we're talking about this, especially with the problematic behaviors of video games among young boys. So already I've listed a number of things. Let me just do the quick short list. Problematic internet use, video games, pornography, gambling, eating. So those are all kind of behavioral addictions, let's say, or compulsion disorders, compulsivity disorders. So those are all kind of things that we could kind of cluster together and say, here's my list of compulsive behavioral disorders. Okay, so that ICD classification of compulsive sexual behavior disorder, that encompasses problematic pornography use for some individuals. So what we're talking about isn't whether someone uses pornography frequently, but whether that becomes problematic, meaning it's persistent, out of control, and continues despite significant negative consequences to one's relationship, work, or well-being. But I will add my 2 cents here, and this is kind of more my perspective and my worldview, is I see even light use being problematic in people's lives too, because it does come with a sense of shame. And I do think light use is a gateway drug to more extensive use. So, kind of like what we're finding out with alcohol, there's really no safe limit of alcohol. For a number of years, there was kind of classifications between mild, moderate, and heavy use. And the mild use category, those negative effects were kind of deemed negligible, if non-trivial, if trivial. I think what we're finding out now is there's no non-trivial amount of alcohol use. And that's my perspective with pornography. I think there's no non-trivial level of pornography use that doesn't come with some kinds of consequences, especially, and we're going to get into this maybe in some later episodes, especially when you take into account developmental issues. If you expose a young mind, a developing mind, to pornography, the brain is just plastic at that point, which means it's this concept of neuroplasticity. It's forming, it's molding, and we want all the influences going into that developing mind designed for optimal growth and development. But if we introduce something that has a powerful addictive influence, like substances or like pornography, it's going to take that young developing mind in non-optimal directions. And so we want to be as protective as possible for those developing minds. But, once someone gets into adulthood, things are more stabilized and there's more healthy development that's hopefully occurred and can kind of ward off problematic behavioral patterns that may develop. But that's just my perspective. That's my own hypotheses. I don't know if there's safe levels, but I guess I did discuss last episode. Some couples are able to kind of conceptualize porn use in a non-negative way, so that's fine for them. But if you're going to come to counseling with me and ask me my genuine opinion, that's my genuine opinion. Okay, let's get back to the content here. So research indicates that approximately 3 to 6% of pornography users report experiences consistent with compulsivity. And that would be feelings of out of control, unsuccessful attempts to reduce use. Okay. That's one item I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about the state of dependence and how addictions form is, despite your best efforts to stop, you seemingly can't, even in the face of rising consequences. And so that's kind of the idea of dependence. Classically we thought of tissue dependence, which is I'm feeling a biological need for this substance. That's a little harder for us to conceptualize when it's a behavior, but I think when you talk about neurologically speaking, all my reward pathways now are oriented towards that problematic behavior. And so in a sense, it is still a biological or tissue dependence. It's just I'm not introducing a substance to my body. I'm exposing my body to a certain behavior, which now my body is deemed, a biological imperative to get. Okay, let me get back on track here. And continued consumption despite negative consequences. So that's, that is mapping on now to 3 to 6% of pornography users. So this suggests that while most pornography users do not develop compulsive patterns, a meaningful minority do experience problematic use that resembles addiction in some ways. I guess we could also make the comparison to maybe weed. For a long time, folks said weed's not addictive, and it's this natural thing that occurs, and it's really benign. And again, I think what we're finding out through the research is that weed use, in fact, paradoxically, it's supposed to chill you out, but paradoxically, it increases your sense of paranoia, anxiety, depression. It demotivates you. And so I'm from the West Coast. I'm from Washington State. Weed was legalized pretty early on, so I don't really have like any kind of cultural bugaboos about it. But in terms of just what I'm seeing in the literature and the research, it seems overall to be a net negative for my clients and for the participants who have been sampled in those studies. It's just not what we make it out to be, and it seems to be causing more problems than benefits. And I do believe it's truly addictive. I truly believe weed is addictive. Maybe, not in the sense that alcohol is, where you can see tissue dependence occur very rapidly with heavy use. But I do think there are like psychological addictive properties to it. So, all right, I'm trying to get back on track here. I keep veering off. So what does the neuroscience tell us about this debate? Some studies have found similarities between brain activity of individuals who report compulsive pornography use and those with substance or gambling addictions. Interesting. A 2014 study by Voon and colleagues found that men who reported problems controlling their pornography use showed greater activity in brain regions associated with reward processing when viewing sexual images compared to control participants. So it's hijacking that dopamine reward system. This heightened reactivity to sexual cues This heightened reactivity to sexual cues resembles patterns seen in substance addiction. And we can also, I think I've seen this from qualitative reports too, is that men will report a greater tendency for objectifying women or just being in normal day-to-day situations, but their mind goes to the sexual. And so they find that kind of disturbing. And so it's, I would say, it's not good to be objectifying women sexually and to have a sexual preoccupation when you're at the workplace, or when you're with friends. Like, you want your mind to be present and to be focused on cultivating good relationships and being productive at work and doing your best, and not intrusive thoughts about sexual scenarios. So I think that's also something worth noting. Other research has examined changes in the brain's dopamine system. Cambridge University researchers found that men who reported compulsive sexual behaviors, including problematic pornography use, showed higher levels of desire but lower levels of enjoyment when viewing sexual content. So there you go. We're right back to that paradoxical, irrational aspect of addiction, where I want it, the desire and the behavior of seeking it out increases and increases, but the enjoyment and the pleasure derived from it, the reward, decreases. So again, I'm back to chasing the dragon. And this pattern is consistent with the concept of tolerance seen in other addictions. However, critics of the addiction model point out important differences. Some argue that the neurological changes associated with pornography use are not as robust or consistent as those seen in substance addictions. And I think that's just probably true across the board of any behavioral addiction. So I don't think that's necessarily the porn problem. I think that's the behavioral addiction problem. It's kind of just a different category. So there's some important nuances there. Because again, a substance is working directly with my biology, whereas a behavior is just a little different. So I think we kind of need to think of addiction, I think, kind of in an umbrella sense, and there's kind of maybe two subcategories, behavioral and substance use addictions, but I think they both kind of occupy the same space. Okay, so furthermore, these changes may reflect normal neuroplasticity rather than pathology. I think that's a fair point. If I'm going to engage in a behavior like playing baseball, I'm going to have a lot more brain activity. I'm going to have a lot more brain structure development in those areas. But I will say, though, the more I play baseball, the more I enjoy it. Right? Like there's a nuancing of what's going on in baseball. Or let's say writing. If I really want to become a solid writer and I write every day, maybe I don't enjoy it as much, but I'm finding a depth and a quality and a nuance to the experience that's maybe different types of reward or even more rewarding or a more delayed gratification. And that's just not the case with pornography use or behavioral addiction. I'm doing it more and more and more and getting less and less and less from it. So let me go back here. The brain changes in response. The brain changes in response to all meaningful experiences. That's what brains do. That's a fair point. It's a fair critique. So this highlights an important point. Neurological changes don't necessarily indicate pathology. Good point. Point taken. And the brain adapts to all sorts of repeated behaviors and experiences, making it challenging to distinguish between normal adaptations and dysfunction, right? So just with time, with time and repetition, you can increase brain activity and structural differences in your brain with anything. If I get into cooking, all those brain regions and areas are going to be reoriented to cooking. I'm going to feel a lot of more reward, a lot more seeking for cooking. I'm going to start looking up recipes online. I'm going to be spending more time at the grocery store perusing fresh ingredients. And so, it could be just true of anything. Maybe I'll be at work and I'll start thinking of cooking, but I'm not going to experience any distress. I think that's important to note is these are normal brain processes that are taking place, but I'm not going to experience any distress from cooking. It might be a fun daydream to think about a dish. And then I'll prepare a dish and it's going to, increase the enjoyment and the time with my family. Again, porn's just not going to deliver those kinds of tangible goods. It's going to just continue to erode. Okay. Beyond the neurological debate, researchers have identified certain behavioral patterns associated with with problematic pornography use. These include, first, escalation in consumption, spending increasing amounts of time viewing pornography or seeking more extreme content to achieve the same level of arousal. A study by Weary and Ballou, 2016, found that some regular pornography users reported needing to increase the time spent or the novelty of the content to maintain satisfaction. So I touched on that last episode. I need to, I've had clients report spending 6 hours. That's pretty disruptive to your life. If I'm having to spend 6 hours viewing pornography just to feel anxiety relief. That's another point too. I've had clients report a lot of anxiety, and this is kind of true with what folks report with alcohol. But when they're not using, they're tremendously anxious, and then they start using and they feel an anxiety relief. That's not good too, right? That's a very bad behavior to kind of a reward system to establish for yourself. You want to have the means to reduce and soothe your anxiety, not through something like that. Okay, let me get back to my list. Sorry. Second, failed attempts to control use. We touched on that in just a little bit ago. So research by Grubbs and colleagues in 2015 found that significant predictor of self-reported addiction was repeatedly trying and failing to reduce consumption. So it takes this power over you. And they say in AA, I recognize I'm powerless to my addiction. Like that's kind of, like step one, right? That's pretty preliminary foundation for your recovery, is admitting that you're powerless over your addiction. And so there's just a lot of truth to that when we're talking about behavioral addictions as well. As there is a power shift where it's located in you, and now it's relocated to the behavioral addiction, and it's now taking over your life. So the third piece, continued use despite negative consequences such as relationship problems, work interference, or significant distress. Again, I'm not feeling those when I'm thinking about cooking, right? There's not negative consequences mounting when I'm thinking about baking cookies or chicken Alfredo or cordon bleu, or a new way to do cordon bleu. Maybe I'll try turkey instead of ham. Right? It's not delivering a lot of distress for me. So a longitudinal study by Perry and Schiefler in 2018 found that men who reported problematic pornography use were more likely to experience relationship dissolution over time. So a lot of partners will leave, and they'll say they don't feel valued or they're like a priority. If someone has a sexual need, they want them to come to them. If they are feeling anxious, they want them to find that anxiety relief in conversation and in relationship and in the resources found in the relationship, not through pornography. Okay, fourth and final piece here, withdrawal-like symptoms when unable to access pornography, including irritability, anxiety, restlessness, and intense cravings. These symptoms, while not as physically intense as withdrawal from substances like alcohol or opioids, can cause significant distress. And I just mentioned that a second ago, and I have seen that so true in the lives of my clients, where they don't feel in control, they don't feel stable, and so they have to go seek out pornography. So some scholars offer an alternative perspective here. Many of these patterns may better reflect high sexual desire combined with moral or religious conflicts about pornography rather than addiction per se. The distress often comes from the perceived loss of control, not necessarily from the behavior itself. And that's fine. We need that debate, we need that discussion, and we need to be able to qualify some of these findings or look at these findings in light of those alternative explanations. But I tend to disagree with that perspective. I see it as the behavior itself does have these kinds of inherent addictive properties where it takes agency and power away from people and just leaves them with all those 4 characteristics of addiction. So I'm critical of that view, but I value those outside views because it refines our understanding, and that's what science is about. Having debates, multiple views, sorting through it, and then letting the evidence and the best theoretical position lead the way. Okay, so this highlights the importance of considering psychological, social, and cultural factors, not just behavioral patterns, when evaluating problematic use. Another really important question in this debate is what distinguishes passionate interest from problematic compulsion? Many activities can be intensely engaging without being harmful. Many people play hours and upon hours of music, creating art, engaging in sports, cooking, I've already mentioned, or practicing writing, without considering these behaviors addictive. Or I will add, maybe they do consider it addictive, but there is a perspective by William Glasser called positive addiction. Maybe I'm addicted to serving others. Maybe I'm addicted to caring for my body and exercising and eating. Sure, if you're carrying those things out that we perceive as positive to an extent that's really rigid and causing maybe some disruption, I'd say, yeah, it's worth evaluating. But by and large, if I'm addicted to eating healthy, exercising, taking care of my body, going to the doctor, and serving my community, gosh, I'll take that addiction any day over a porn addiction or some other kind of, gambling or behavioral addiction. What comes out in the final analysis is probably a lot of positives with a mix of some negatives. Again, I just don't think that's the same analysis you get when you look at porn use. Research suggests several key distinguishing factors. First, functional impairment. Does the behavior interfere with important life domains like work, relationships, or health? A 2017 study by Grubbs and colleagues found that perceived addiction to pornography predicted psychological distress and relationship dysfunction over time. So I do think it is causing impairment, but you've got to think that is a very surface level way of looking at human behavior and psychology. I think the reasons we go to that is it's the most obvious and it's the most measurable. And it leaves things like healing or full humanity or transformation or wholeness to the side, and those things are a little more ineffable, a little harder to operationalize and measure. So I think it's a good starting point. It's an important factor, and it also functional impairment too is kind of a little bit philosophically neutral, right? Whereas those other things like transformation, healing, wholeness, those are more philosophically informed concepts that have different traditions. And so then they're harder to operationalize and to define and to measure. So it's a good starting point, but I think it's also, we got to nuance our conversation too. Second is the loss of control. Do individuals feel unable to moderate their use despite genuine desires to do so? A study by Sineski and colleagues in 2018 found that perceived loss of control was more strongly associated with distress than frequency of use. So, maybe they used it once a week, but that time when they did use it, they felt like they were resisting it, and their resistance didn't make a difference. They still ended up doing the behavior and felt out of control. So that perception, that interpretation of the loss of control was very distressing, and maybe had a high magnitude effect throughout their week. So, again, I just think that speaks to kind of my perspective too, is it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't have to be something that you're doing on a daily basis. You can do it once a week, once a month, and it's going to have still a high magnitude effect on your well-being. Third, use as a coping mechanism. Is pornography being used primarily to escape negative emotions rather than for pleasure? Research by Weary and Ballou in 2017 found that pornography, or using pornography to cope with unpleasant feelings or stress, was associated with more problematic outcomes than using it for sexual pleasure. But again, I will say the very nature of pornography is fantastical in nature. Pornography is produced with just outrageous body types and scenarios. I mean, it is all pleasure. There is, and all fantasy and all escapism. There is no kind of benign, simple. I mean, I guess there is. But I guess the whole premise, I think what I'm trying to say is the whole premise from the start, from the foundation, is escapism and fantasy. So I think it just naturally lends itself to it being used for escapism and not a good coping skill. Okay. When pornography use becomes problematic, what treatment approaches have shown effectiveness? Clinical research in this area is still developing, but several evidence-based approaches have emerged. And I will say it's just odd, well, not that odd. I kind of mentioned this last episode, is the research is so new and so fresh, and this is just kind of a new area that we're starting to look at. So then treatment options are also being formed as we speak. And then you got to develop the treatment, and then you've got to do the research on the treatment, and then you have to look at multiple studies on those treatment and compare them to other treatments. So it just takes a long time, and we're all kind of just in new territory. But I will say we have some models here that are tried and true, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and the research has shown some promising results in addressing problematic pornography use. A study by Hardy and colleagues in 2010 found that CBT interventions focusing on identifying triggers, challenging maladaptive thoughts, and developing alternative coping strategies, and that is just your standard CBT right there, reduces problematic use and associated distress with pornography use. You also have ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, which emphasizes mindfulness and value-based living. Has also shown effectiveness in 2016. A study by Crosby and Tuhig found that ACT interventions help participants reduce problematic pornography viewing and increased acceptance of unwanted urges without acting on them. And that's a pretty strong. I usually kind of oscillate between CBT and ACT. I also throw in a little bit of DBT in there too, dialectical behavior therapy. But those are all kind of CBT, ACT, and DBT share a lot of, well, maybe not DBT, but certainly CBT and ACT share a lot of common ground when it comes to philosophy and approach and interventions. For individuals whose pornography use is connected to underlying issues like depression, anxiety, or trauma, in my world we call that a comorbid disorder. So there's a comorbidity or co-occurring issues. Addressing these conditions is really important, and looking at the co-occurring nature of a person's presentation, and not just isolating, oh, you're depressed, and then let's ignore the porn, or oh, you're using porn and it's causing distress, and then let's ignore the depression. We have to take both into account. So research by Kafka, not the author of Metamorphoses, but the researcher in 2010 suggests that treating comorbid mental health conditions often reduces problematic sexual behaviors as well. So take both into account. Researchers in pornography use and addiction emphasize the importance of individualized treatment. So I have to really get to know you. I have to understand your depression, what causes the depression. I have to understand how you cope with the depression, which is going to porn. And I have to work with the whole person and understand you and all those streams that flow into each of those issues. So effective treatment begins with understanding the function of pornography, how it functions in that person's life. Is it about sexual satisfaction, or is it about coping? Is it about escaping? So the treatment needs to be tailored and fine-tuned to address all those underlying factors, and then focusing on reducing and then re-empowering that client. So I want to relocate the power and the agency from the addiction to the client. Support groups have also been beneficial for many individuals. So while research on their effectiveness is limited, preliminary studies suggest that groups following something like a 12-step model or other peer support approaches may provide valuable accountability and community for those seeking changes. Okay, but before wrapping up here, I want to address the role of partners in this discussion. So research indicates that partners of men who report problematic pornography use often experience significant distress, including feelings of betrayal, inadequacy, or rejection. And this is, kind of twofold. There's two dimensions here. Is one, sometimes men will seek out therapy with me because it's not almost out of a concern from themselves, but for their partner. Their partner is really affected by their porn use, and so they don't want to keep hurting their partner. And I will say that's heartbreaking and sad, but also I love that protective, pro-social aspect in men and in masculinity that prompts them to seek out help. Even though sometimes on the other side of the coin, it's their masculinity that's preventing them from coming. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, but these relationship dynamics can create cycles where relationship distress increases pornography use as an escape mechanism. So I'm as sick as my secrets, right? I said that last episode. I'm feeling shame and embarrassment from this secret use. And so I try to stop use, reconnect with my partner, and then, I start to feel lose control, power. I get back into it, and it's this kind of vicious cycle. I think that's what I'm trying to suggest. This vicious cycle that causes damage to relationships. So studies by Zitzman and Butler in 2009 suggest that involving partners in the treatment, so let's bring them in, when appropriate and desired by both parties, can improve outcomes in relationship healing. And I have had a client seek me out, had a problematic relationship with porn, and brought his wife in, and we kind of just did couples counseling, and talked about reconciliation and forgiveness and healing in their relationship, while also kind of interspersing some individual treatment for the gentleman who came in. And that was just a great way of letting that partner feel like she's a part of the journey and a part of the healing. And so it located a sense of responsibility on both of them, even though he was the one who was kind of in the wrong, so to speak. He was kind of the offending party and she was kind of the victim party. But let's change that narrative to say, well, they're both on a healing journey, so how can they both lift each other up and support each other in overcoming this problem? Okay, so it's essential to emphasize that partners are not responsible for managing someone else's pornography use, and treatment should never blame partners for another person's behaviors or choices, but let's make this a shared journey. All right, so as I wrap up today, I want to highlight several important takeaways. First, while problematic pornography use shares some features with addiction, the scientific community continues to debate, but I think I've given you enough of my argumentation and my reasoning why I think it should be conceptualized as a behavioral addiction, and I think that's just the best language, the best conceptual framework for understanding the problematic behavioral patterns that follow from pornography use. Second, I want to say what matters most is not the label, but the impact on people's lives. But yeah, at the same time, the label does matter, in how we conceptualize, define, operationalize, and distinguish constructs from other constructs does matter. So I think I take that statement back. When pornography use causes significant distress or dysfunction, it warrants attention, regardless whether it's an addiction or compulsion or problematic behavior. So no matter what, people need support and help, and we have enough research in terms of what the outcomes are. But we can continue to have those debates. So what I want to say is there's the scientific debate, and then there's the clinical world, and let's just kind of continue to give people support. But having the language, I think, is really important. So I'm taking issue with my own text here. Third, effective treatments exist for those who struggle with pornography use, and these approaches typically address the underlying functions and context of use rather than focusing solely on abstinence. I think that's really important. It's kind of a harm reduction approach or a more holistic approach, looking at those comorbidities. I think we just need kind of a more holistic perspective than just kind of a stern, judgmental, arms crossed, no, shouldn't do that. Okay, so in my next episode, I'm going to explore how pornography consumption impacts men's intimate relationships. I touched on that a little bit today, but I want to go into greater depth about that, and talk about sexual satisfaction connection with their partners. And I'm going to examine both the challenges of pornography that may be present for those relationships, and then strategies for maintaining healthy intimacy in a internet media saturated world. So I want to thank you for listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Daniel Bates, and I look forward to continuing this series next episode. And if you have any questions or comments, please check out my Substack, Men's Mental Health. I think it's just Men's Mental Health. Men's Mental Health Substack, or Men's Mental Health Substack Daniel Bates. And that's where you can find the episodes and then a lot of other content from myself. So thanks for listening, and take care.